what we're seeing in the world today, this continual declining birth rate below what's known as replacement level, around 2.1 children on average per person, continual generations below that, 30, 40, 50 years from now, are going to transform societies in ways that we're not thinking about, whether we like it or not.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Stephen J. Shaw, and we're going to be talking about the decreasing global fertility rates and his new documentary, Birthgap, which explores all facets of that phenomenon. But first, I would like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to episodes, read synopses, see photos of my guests, a little bio on myself. There's also a YouTube channel where you can listen, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman, and there's an Exploding Human Facebook page. As I said, my guest today is Stephen J. Shaw. Stephen is a data analyst, and he has spent the last 7 years traveling all around the world, collecting data, having conversations about the declining global fertility rates. In the last 70 years, it's 50%. And there are many aspects of this global situation which are going to be presenting themselves in our futures. And we talk about, what the causes are and what some of the solutions are and how our communities and our thinking can change in order to improve our situation in the future. And we do get into some very interesting specifics and some of the things that people are doing already to mitigate this situation. So this is Stephen J. Shaw. Good morning, afternoon, evening, Stephen. I am in Los Angeles. You are in Japan. So the miracle of the internet. We're all over the world on this thing. So glad you're here. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, good afternoon to you. It's morning here in Tokyo, so it's great to be on this show.
Yeah, I have been looking over the information that I have on you, and I know let's just start with this. If people want to do this even before they listen to the podcast, don't shut it off though. If you're already listening, this doesn't make any sense to what I'm telling my audience. But there's a 15-minute YouTube video out of the first chapter of your new movie, which may enlighten you as to maybe after the show. Watch it, but tell people what that is called and how they can find it on YouTube in case they're interested in getting a jump start on the movie that you're in the process of completing.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, the movie is called Birthgap, Childless World. It's broken into 3 parts, and the first part is actually 50 minutes. It's nearly an hour long.
Oh, you said 50. Okay.
Yeah,
I heard it wrong. Okay, yeah.
And it's a solid introduction to what's going on in the world and why it matters. Beyond that, please keep in touch with the birthgap.org website, and we'll let people know when it's going to stream on services from next year.
Now, most people don't even know about this topic, believe it or not. I have, as somebody who does a health-oriented podcast and things about the future, it has only come up, as I was saying before we started recording, it's only come up in one other episode of my podcast about a declining is it a declining birth rate or declining fertility? And what is the difference?
Well, there's different terminologies that get used, and the terminologies aren't terribly helpful. In effect, it's the same thing. It's the reality that people, for whatever reason, to keep it simple for a moment, people are having overall less babies than they were before. And it's got to a point now that we need to be thinking about the consequences of this, both for individual lives, for communities, and for indeed civilization in future.
This was my first reaction to it when I heard it the first time. And I'm sure you've heard these things, but my audience probably hasn't heard a lot about this. But the idea is I grew up with the fear of overpopulation. there was a book called The Population Bomb that was huge in I think the 70s. And it was about declining resources, destruction to the environment, too many people to sustain the planet. Now, I understand the economic issue of younger people boosting, keeping the economy going for older people. I understand it economically. That makes complete sense to me. But are there too many people? Let's say we get this birth rate up. That doesn't do anything for the other issues caused by too many people. So address that. And I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to really wrap my head around this because I feel like there's two things going on at once that are fighting each other.
Well, it genuinely is a great question, because one of the real reasons this is a very nasty problem is it takes decades to unravel itself, or to really see what is happening.
Yeah.
So if you take the position, going back to Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, that you mentioned back in the 70s, and everything that came out of that movement, let's just assume that was right. And I'm not saying it's right at all, but if we say, that was right, that was 50 years ago. Yes. What is happening now is effectively the opposite. And what I mean is, what we're seeing in the world today, this continual declining birth rate below what's known as replacement level, around 2.1 children on average per person, continual generations below that, 30, 40, 50 years from now, are going to transform societies in ways that we're not thinking about, whether we like it or not. Let's say the birth rates in a country suddenly go below replacement level. No one's going to notice, because nothing changes. Maybe, kindergartens will notice, and then elementary schools a little bit. It takes about 30, 40 years before you suddenly realize we don't have enough workers, or there's a shift here. And then 50 years before you really notice, wait, now we have so few potential parents. The people aged 20 to 30, they're less than before, and they're the ones we want to become parents, and they're still having less children. Meanwhile, we still have all these old people to somehow take care of. And that change in what I call the age balance, whether you think reducing populations is a good thing or a bad thing, that's a separate discussion. The reality is there's going to be a change in the age balance that societies just aren't prepared to cope with yet.
I can totally see that one. And I'm going to be one of the old guys if I'm still around. Maybe we'll figure out a way to cook me and eat me for the young people. So
well, I'm not going to go there, but I'm not too far behind you.
That was that movie, Soylent Green. You remember that movie? It was that futuristic movie. It's people, they were making food out of old people. So what is there's a couple of things going on here. What is the reason for this? Mm-hmm. And what is the solution? And the third question I have, and I'm asking too many questions in a row, mm-hmm. but what is the ideal population for the planet Earth?
Oh, great question.
That's a tough one, right?
Well, no, again, these are the questions I was asking people. When I started making the documentary in 2016, I went on the road to Europe and then Japan, literally on the street, asking people, what's going on with your life? Do you want children? Or why did you have children? Or why did you not have children? And what I was looking for was common patterns across all of these countries, because demographers, academics, mostly attribute this to local factors. In Japan, it's work-life balance. People work too hard here. In Italy, it was high unemployment rates amongst youths. But every time you looked at one of those reasons, you would find a country that was an exception. So, for example, another common reason is the high cost of education in certain countries. But you go to Germany, which offers free education for everybody. You actually have one of the lowest birth rates there too. So I decided in 2016, almost for my own sanity, I needed to know why this was happening. I'm a data analyst. I'm about figuring out what's happening with data trends. And this one just didn't make sense. It took me about 1.5 years to figure out what was going on, because there was a common trend across every single country. And that's going to be part of an academic paper I'm writing and a book, as well as this documentary. And it's revealed in chapter 1, which is on YouTube now. I'm not going to give everything exactly away, because I'd like to see people understand how this story evolved. But the reason ultimately, I think, is to do with people wanting children but leaving it too late. And there is a gap in people's understanding of the reality of having a child mid to late 30s, 40s, compared to, what society leads us to believe, So in the documentary, I sat down with 5 fertility doctors, and it was consistent. They were saying people have this over, confidence that they still have time. And of course, it works in many cases, and that's just wonderful.
Sure.
But more and more, those are the exceptions. So to answer your question as to why, let me say this. It is not because people are choosing to have smaller families. That's a very common myth out there. And there's certain organizations that promote that. And it's a simple thing, because if you look at the average number of children per mother, you would say, oh, this is going down. And especially if you look at countries in less developed areas of the world, certainly sub-Saharan Africa, you can see, very high birth rates, but they're going down. So there's this general movement, even in Africa, right the way through to the most developed nations. But if you look underneath it, most people's desired family size hasn't changed. What it's been caused by isn't, an unmet, number of children. And then the question is, why is that happening? Why are people leaving it too late? And I don't have all the answers for that, but I think that's where we need to ask ourselves, why are we focusing so much on other things first? And maybe that's okay. I really do want to make one point, though, lest I forget, which is my own perspective strongly, is that no one should be encouraged or forced to have a child when they're not ready for it. And if that means having no children, I will be the biggest supporter of anybody in that situation. What I'm seeing, though, is a very large number of people who had either less children than they wanted or had no children at all, simply because they left it too late. To answer your question, there's one more there on what is the ideal population. I've asked a number of people people in environmental organizations, population organizations, professors, and the answer I would get, if I get an answer, it would usually be around half of what we are now. But the problem you see is, and I'm not supporting that, I think it's a numbers game and it doesn't get you very far. I think this is about reducing consumption, ultimately, not the number on the planet. But to those people who think it's a simple case, like you're driving a car, we're going too fast, let's just put the brake down to slow down for a generation or two, and then we can go on. Population dynamics don't work like that. You cannot scale a population. You either kind of exponentially go up, which we did, of course, in many recent decades. You go flat, or you go down at an increasingly rapid rate. So dwelling on the numbers doesn't get you very far. It's still going to come back to the same thing, which is consumption of the number of people who happen to be here. We as individuals really can't and shouldn't control that.
So there's a natural way that people move in terms of population and populating or depopulating as a species, and that is really out of our control in some ways. And that's I think that's what you're saying. It has a tendency to go one way or the other. Well, it's never really gone down, has it? Historically,
historically, that would only have happened in periods of war, famine, when there were temporary situations. There's very rare exceptions, France being one, maybe 200 years ago, where it went down, but those were societal things and it always recovered. The worrying thing in this situation, there are no examples anywhere of wealthy nations during peaceful times going through what we're going through right now. And by definition, there's no example that we can follow to say, oh, here's one country that at this moment in time was able to balance its birth rate, because we have to balance this. This is not an option for society. Civilizations will end or be taken over by other civilizations if this situation continues. That's just mathematical. So either we figure out how to solve this, given it's going to impact us, as this age balance changes, or we put our hands up and say some future generation is going to solve it. I'd rather we solve it now. I'd rather we find a way to ultimately balance this. And even if you don't agree with that, I'd say that we, if nothing else, need to prepare for this new world. We need to be aware of what is about to happen. But you actually did ask what the solution was. Could I answer that one now at a high level?
Yeah. Then we can just stop.
No, I'm sorry. It's a whole new conversation.
We have the solution. It's coming.
What I'm unfortunately going to say, perhaps, is that people have tried many solutions: government involvement, financial incentives, addressing things like kindergarten spaces. Those all might be good things. They probably are, and they very marginally might, in some cases, boost the birth rate. But it's very marginal. None of those things are going to solve this. Statistically, we can see this because the reality is we don't have examples. What I have found, and to sorry to disappoint anyone, when you watch the full documentary, there isn't one single aha moment. This is the solution. It asks a lot of questions.
Sure.
But what I've seen is that when people watch this, particularly young people. I had a 12-year-old watch it who was fascinated by it, up to college-age students who have done presentations and Q&A with. These are the people who have the ability to ask themselves questions about what they want for the society they're going to inherit and the personal decisions they might make around this. And simply having young people watch this and see the potential outcomes for their own future fuels phenomenal conversations. And I think that's where the solution lies. It lies with those young people who I believe in significant numbers will start to question a lot of things about the way society is today.
Yeah, this idea that people are waiting to have kids till it's too late, for me, that would be economic. I'm older and I've had my kids already, and that's sort of, but I didn't have my first kid till I was 41, which I guess would be considered later in life for most people. Yeah. And I wasn't really worried about it because I'm a guy and my wife's a lot younger. When I think about why I would wait, it's because I want to be financially stable before I bring kids into the world, because I want them to have, a comfortable life with not a big struggle. That would be my reason. I'm sure that's one of the reasons.
Well,
people's careers, they want to build their careers. So there's a priority thing going on with, and an expectation that I need, and I'm putting need in quotes, to be at a certain place before I have these kids. So they can have benefits of that.
You've said it very well. The prioritization, I think, is key, but I don't think it's people sitting down necessarily, writing out a list of what their priorities are. Society kind of tells us what the priorities are, and we follow that. It's just what humans do. And especially younger people who see the path that's laid out for them, go to college, get a good education where possible, start a career, build a career, possibly think of more education training at some point. When is the right moment to kind of jump off that pathway to have a child? Well, for most people, it's probably not right now. There's something else going on. And, it may be the case that, we in our minds, we're not necessarily thinking of delaying this, but just the time is not right now. Inevitably, you get to a point where years have gone by, maybe a decade's gone by, maybe 2 decades have gone by. The reality is that this is not about pure fertility issues. I think an even bigger issue for not having children is not having the right partner at the right time. So you're now 35. It's male or female. I think men are overconfident, by the way, in their ability to have children when they're older, because they've got to find that younger woman, and they're competing with a pool of younger men for the same fertile woman. So that's another thing. But let's say you get to 35 and you're ready. You have your apartment, you have your car, your 2 cars, you're able to afford your vacation, your winter vacation, you've join the golf club, all is good. And somehow after all that, you feel it's the right time, but maybe you've just broken up with your boyfriend, girlfriend. Maybe the person you're with right now has been, fabulous for you over recent times. But when you start to think of, do I want to have a child with this person? I've seen that lead to breakups. So this is a complex thing. And ultimately, people today largely are confronting those decisions when the odds are against them. And that's a significant reason why we are where we are.
There's a lot of bombardment with social pressures and ways of that we think we're supposed to be living. This idea that, I can do it later, and then later never comes, which is true of almost anything that you want to do. I have a friend, she had 6 kids. And she said, if I had waited till the right time to have kids, I never would have had any kids. So if you want kids, have them. That was her attitude. This was a while ago, though. I mean, her youngest is probably 25. So, and all the way up to 40 something. So, that was an interesting take on having children for her. She just said, we didn't have enough money. We didn't have the right house. We didn't have X, Y, and Z. We loved each other and we wanted to have kids. And that's what they did. And trust the universe that it's going to work out as long as you're not, have some random problem. But, they were hardworking, conscious people and everything worked out. And so maybe there's an overthinking problem too.
First of all, I've heard that a lot too, where people have had children that there's no right time. It just happened, and they met the right person. They were young, and now they've got a family, and they're happy with it. That's not uncommon at all. And the advice I've got from those, well, you just said it, is there's no right time. So don't overthink it, and people do overthink it. But if I could, Bob, there's a darker side to all this that I think we need to talk about. That the darker side is for those people who had planned to have children, who didn't, who are very likely to end up perhaps with a partner, perhaps single, but going through periods of grief. That's what people who are childless are calling it now. You can find a lot of support forums for, I've spoken to many, many of these people, and what they're experiencing is this deep grief that they didn't have a child. And it's grief to the point where I almost felt that I was becoming a counselor to try and help these people, come to terms with the fact that their life didn't lead the way they'd wanted to. And I'm not trained for that. I had to kind of understand that what I need to do going forward is help connect those people to professionals who are. But there's a vast amount of people out there who are going through loneliness, going through depression, because their assumed life plan didn't work out. And it gets even worse from there. Though in time, I think a lot of these people, I understand, not everyone comes to terms with it. But then there's the concept of aging without children, linked to longevity, which I know is a topic. I listened to one of your podcasts just now about longevity. Well, in societies today where we have shrinking extended families, there aren't so many, nephews and nieces, never mind children, to be there. I don't mean necessarily just to provide a direct caring role, but simply to engage with older people, to make them feel part of community. I think the reality of the way we're going is we're going to see a significant increase in old age loneliness, old age depression, which is not healthy on any level. So the question about whether people have children or not, or how many they have, is a very humanistic question that goes far beyond the number of children you have or whether you did or you didn't.
Well, that's really interesting, because to me, there is a biological imperative or a drive to naturally to have kids. Now, are there exceptions? Yeah, there's people that don't want them. They think they'd be terrible parents. Yes. They had terrible parents. They don't want to do it. It's not right for them. Yes. Great, don't have them. But yes. But there is that feeling that your life, I think for most people, that your life isn't quite complete because you haven't done that cycle of, replicating something from yourself that's going to go on. There's a need for human beings to be, well, it's, in a sense, it's immortal in a way. It's to carry on your DNA.
Legacy.
And
sorry to interrupt, but there's a term that's used, the legacy, to carry on your legacy. And people,
well, I guess it is legacy, but it's legacy, but it's even deeper than that. It just seems like it goes beyond. It goes into something that's just always been there and always probably will be. That we're a species that wants to continue itself. That's a survival thing, and there is an emotional component to it that I understand what you're saying, that it can be very heartbreaking for people, and I've seen it. I mean, I know a number of people in my life that are older now and don't have kids, and it's aside from the sort of daily living issues that present themselves when you don't have somebody that's really close to you to help you, there is a missing piece for some of these people that is it's heartbreaking, I guess it would be the word for some of them.
Yeah, and I think, frankly, what I've become more aware of is how society really isn't sympathetic or thinking about, for example, people listening to this podcast will be, who had wanted children, will be feeling very deep about what we're talking about.
Yeah. I was trying to be kind of guarded about the way I just said it because I didn't want to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
That's why I hope I didn't, by the way.
I think you were very guarded. And I certainly wasn't criticizing, but we cannot talk about this issue without being aware that there are people who you might need help, and there are support groups online for men and women who are childless, not by choice. And another, I think, misunderstood fact, to go back to your point that there are people who don't want children. Of course there are, and I'll be their biggest supporters because that's their choice, and we should support that. But that's the minority here. The vast majority, and the academics have estimated it might be 80% or more of people without children are people who had actually planned to have a family.
Yeah.
And if I can just share how that actually manifests itself, I'm talking to you in a room. I've got photographs around me from the documentary, and some of those include children. And I was doing a Zoom call with a person who had no children. And she said, I'm really upset talking to you because you've got photographs of children around you. And I would never have imagined that I could trigger something like that. And then separately, I was looking at a kind of an app to set up my Sonos speakers. I don't mean to promote a brand, but I've got a Sonos, if I can say that. And it asked me, what room is this? And one of the rooms you could choose was family room. And I thought, if I have to call my room family room, that's going to hurt a lot of people. So it's little things, I think, in society that we need to pay more attention, or let's say, be more sensitive to. People without children have a vast role by definition. Everyone has a role, but people without children can be some of the most generous with their time, the most generous with charities, and play a broad role, or should play a role in helping us re-engineer the societies, this age balance shift. How are we going to take care of older people? We've got to pull everybody into that. And again, I just feel this conversation, it's a conversation I knew nothing about before making the documentary. I got pulled into this, but once I realized just how important this is for such a large number of people, young who want to have children, who are making decisions, and those who didn't, as well as the elderly that we're going to have to support. This is a subject that needs to go to the top of our agendas.
This is a consequence that sort of numbers can't really edify. It's just it's one of those things that's just it will impact the society. And when you were I had read this amazing thing, and they're starting to do it here a little bit in a couple places in the United States, but I think it happened in somewhere in Europe. But they were taking some places that were assisted living homes, were taking in young college students to live there at a reduced rent, and for time to be spent with the elderly folks there that needed that, and vice versa. It went both ways, because people who've been around a long time, they have a lot to offer. They've seen a lot of things and they've done a lot of things, and it gave both parties purpose, meaning, compassion, and it was economically feasible. It was a brilliant idea. When I heard it, I'm like, why isn't every place doing that? It was just so cool that somebody thought of it, and two, that they were able to implement it and it worked. So that's one of the things. It has nothing to do with fertility necessarily, but it does have to do with how we're going to re-engineer the society going forward if some of these things you're talking about transpire.
Well, it's a fantastic. I have never heard of exactly that, but I'm heartened by it. This is part of the solution, bringing together younger people and older people and stopping this kind of division between those who've gone through retirement and for one reason or another start to become excluded from the society the rest of us inhabit. This week I visited a community place in south of Tokyo where you have 30 people living in a share house. And it was the most beautiful experience. I would almost, I am interested to go and spend some time there myself. I walked in and you people, these 20s and 30s mainly, but you'd several families. So I walk in and there's a giant living room and a giant kitchen. And in the living room, there's a parent doing homework with kids. And then I understand it's not the kid's parent. The parents are doing a conference call and somebody else is helping the kid with their homework. You go into the kitchen and people are kind of either making their own meal or sharing meals. And you had a mother with her daughter baking and someone else saying that they'd never been taught to bake before. Could they watch? And this sense of integration, now that did not include older people, but I asked people that question, could it or should it include older people too? And the general answer was yes. The caveat was healthcare needs, mobility needs. How can we make that work? So to stand back from these examples, my documentary was only a stepping stone. It took 7 years of my life. I thought it would take one. I find that making documentaries can take a lot longer than you expect. The next chapter of my life, as long as I've got, is going to be devoted to helping people with the understanding of what's happening to society and solving it. And part of that is how we design communities. It's civic planning so that the old people's home might be close to areas where students are living, and there might be shared kitchens, and there might be opportunities for the older people to get, to kind of share in childcare in some way. And for young people, as you rightly say, to learn from the older people who've got so much knowledge to give. So I think, it goes deep in terms of literally how we architect our communities as to how we help heal this sense of loneliness. And the irony is, if you do that to bring people together at those age groups, it's going to become easier to start a family because you are going to have support groups around you the way we used to have in the past when the grandparents kind of were not that old, because we now have children later in life, so grandparents are that much older, and they used to live close by and they were there to drop the kids off at. That's gone for many people now, sadly. But I think societies as a whole can find ways to bring back that integration between generations.
The idea to me is taking a big area and a big community and creating smaller communities within it. So you do have that familial kind of village feeling where people are taking care of each other. And also, you're going to meet potential partners if you want to have kids in that situation much more readily than you would living in a big city in a condo, going to work 8-10 hours a day. You're just that's limiting.
Share house, as it's called in Tokyo here. I was speaking to one person. They could easily have afforded to live in their own home, and my understanding was they had a good job, and it could have been quite a large home, relatively speaking. But they said they would have been alone. Whereas they come back from work and they have these people to kind of talk to and socialize with and cook with and watch TV with. And, I really think the path that society pulls us down to kind of live these individual lives separated from our neighbors even now, that really has to change.
I'm going to tell you a little story about my own situation here. There is a woman that lives across the street who did not have kids. She's 92. She started to lose some of her faculties, memory, some physical stuff, but and was unable to take care of herself. My wife and I decided that no one was going to help her unless we did, because it's just the way people are right now. So we took it on in terms of getting her. We cleaned her house up for her. We got her caregivers. I take care of her bills, and I just make sure everything is going okay. I'm happy to do it because I've known her for 20 years, and since I've lived here, and she's a good person, and it's like, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? No one's going to do it, So I just felt like this was presented to me by the universe to do the right thing, because I just couldn't live with myself knowing that I could have done something and I didn't. Now that's me, and that's, is it difficult sometimes? Yeah. Is it a pain to do it sometimes? Yeah, sometimes. But for the most part, I feel good about it. And do you know, and this is the heartbreaking part, because she's pretty happy. She's very happy, actually. The neighbors never ask about her, how she's doing. They never offer to do anything to help. They don't visit her. There is absolutely no sense that there is this woman who's lived here longer than any of them, who's alone in that sense, might need something. They don't even ask my wife or I about it, and we're sort of baffled by it. And it's almost like, are they afraid they're going to be asked to do something they don't want to? Is it's not family, so I'm not going to care. It's not my business. All those things could be true, but how do you change people's compassion level and understanding? Or maybe you don't. And I'm not even tooting my own horn. I just, a little bit.
It's a great story, and what you're doing for this woman. And I appreciate hearing real world stories like that, but it's actually indicative of the problems across societies. And I'm not going to remember the name of the psychologist who came up with a theory some decades ago that basically we all follow what everybody else is doing. Whatever the neighbors do. So you're the exception here. And it's interesting that people haven't followed you, but mostly people are blinkered and just not wanting to be that person who differs from everybody else. Now, it may well happen if one or two other neighbors started helping, that suddenly the whole street would change. But that gives me some hope, if that's right, and I think it is, that actually inside of us as humans, we still have the ability to want to care about our neighbors. It's just we need to kind of remove ourselves from this trap that we've become. It is a trap. In the movie, I call this a birthgap trap, by the way. Birthgap's the kind of court. It's like a trap that societies have become locked into. Is there one more thing could I share with you just in this context?
As much as you want, because I love everything we're talking about. I didn't know it was going to go in this direction, and I'm really happy about it.
And I didn't know it was going in this direction when I started. I was a data analyst. I was talking to people in the street, and I'm finding all of these darker issues that are there and are going to get worse. I spend a lot of time in Detroit, Michigan, and I love Michiganders. Truly, I love northern Michigan. Summertime, it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. But seeing Detroit as a city, having gone through what it went through from the 70s with a rapid fallen population for different reasons, nothing to do with birth rates, but with the same outcome, that you have a city that was built for around 2 million people, and there were 2 million people there, I believe, in the 70s, go down to 1/3 of that. And I was there from maybe 05, 06 for around 10 years. When you turn on the news and you find out that Detroit doesn't even know how many functioning streetlights they have because there aren't funds, there isn't a tax base, and that you have streets that I drive through, and I show this in part of the documentary where, every fifth house is inhabited and everything else is dilapidated. And you see people with kids, living in these houses with their neighborhood literally falling apart. It gave me a sense of the future, that what Detroit has gone through is actually a template for societies, and Japan is already experiencing this, and Italy, Germany, Spain. These societies that have been experiencing ultra low birth rates for 40, 50 years are already getting to that point. So the point is here, if we know this is going to happen, if we can see a Detroit, and then you look at what Detroit's doing now about returning a lot of those areas back to parkland and to, reinventing itself in a positive way, it actually is a template for how multiple societies, I think, can ultimately plan their future in an organized way. And I was triggered to make that point on the idea of communities coming together, where you have these sub-communities, smaller communities within a broader community. We're going to have to reorganize housing anyway. We're going to have to reorganize because there won't be enough people to sustain the towns or cities we have. It may even be saying, of these 3 local towns, only one of them can be sustained long term. Now it's okay. We've got schools in the 3 communities. For now, it's fine. But we know in 20 years' time, it's not going to be like that. So instead of turning a blind eye and then 20 years down the road having these, dilapidated towns and cities and schools wondering which one's going to close, let's plan for that and say, okay, here's the path. Here's how we're going to retain a new form of, community where people, I think, that's the opportunity, I think, to come back to your point, to kind of reorganize communities so that the old and the young are living together, that life is, healthier, and more positive for everybody, despite the circumstances that are going on around us.
Yeah, it's a sort of a combination of urban planning and public health, mental health, obviously, combined into a focus for a plan to do something that is going to work.
And that's right. And we don't really have that. Our institutions are all, function in one thing. So we got urban planning here, we got education planning here, we got healthcare here, we got demographers over there somewhere, and we got economists somewhere. This is multidisciplinary. And what I'd love to see is, academics coming together, think tanks coming together, governments who have a role here. Governments, can't solve this, but they can bring people together or encourage people through funding in some way to say, okay, we need to share knowledge. We need to share ideas.
I'm just thinking, because I do this podcast a lot on health and alternative health, and, the word holistic comes up with health in almost every one of my episodes, because that seems to be where people understand how the body works. And it's the idea of a holistic community makes complete, total sense to me. It's like, why is it just in the health field? Let's, I'm not saying why, but, can we use that concept that that as societies, we're an organism that needs to work in conjunction and not separately.
One of the reasons I came to Japan 5 years ago is because of this project. I came here to research. I hired a researcher who, we went to libraries, we went to, going through archives to understand why the problems that occurred here in the 70s that drove low birth rates. And you see that in the documentary, but also about healthcare here, also about the aging society. Japan is very focused on this problem right now. And I think if solutions might come out that the world can watch, I think there's a reasonable chance we're going to see it happening in Japan. And if I could just tell you a little bit about, my plans for future, I told you the documentary took far too long, and the next step is, my current task is to set up a nonprofit, both here in Japan and the US, to continue education and research, and to bring people together, to create a forum where people can exchange thoughts and knowledge. And to do that at a community level, because this is about individual communities more than just about national policies. So I'm staying in Japan, at least that's my intention, or at least planning to spend a lot more time here to see what might unravel about whether through urban planning, through better, public health policies, education policies, creating environments where people are happier as individuals, less stressed, less loneliness, and whether that can in time also help with the birth rate, because more people will be able to have the children they want to have. So that's going to be fascinating.
I think that exactly is what would happen is, if lives are filled with purpose and happiness and joy, then that's just naturally going to lead to what you're talking about is they're going to want to have families, and it's going to be, it'll go back to a more natural way that humans started out. I think, it's happier people make better decisions. That's what I've noticed. People that are in chaos and are disturbed and they're stressed, they move out of fear and anger and other things that aren't productive.
Yes, I agree. And just to emphasize, this topic, this is not about extinction. Some people might talk about that, but we're not going to go extinct anytime soon. This is about transformation of societies and transformation of civilizations. And whether we like it or not, this is going to happen. It will be the case that those communities who do have children will, become more populous, and those who don't will become less populous. The question might be whether the future societies that want to have children are societies that we would like to be part of or not. There is a risk that this might go in a direction. For example, we're seeing in certain nations, to me, quite scary things, where in Iran right now, you can no longer have a vasectomy. Iran has got a very low birth rate, so they're stopping men having vasectomies to try and increase the birth rate. So interventions like that are certainly not the way I would want to go. I don't think many of us would want to go. But so unless we're alert to this, those things might creep up. Before we know it, policies might be being put in place more and more to be, pro-natalist to the extent that it kind of impinges on human rights. So, just, finishing this podcast and moving on to the next thing doesn't, solve anybody's problem here. This is going to come back to bite time and time and time again. And we really do need to keep this much more at the top of our minds.
Yeah, I look forward to watching at least part 1, because that's out, and I'm going to do that. I didn't know it was out already, so I'm going to check that out. Let's say what that is again, and how do you do lectures too? It seems like you would be a great for a TED Talk or a lecturing. I mean, you're so knowledgeable of this, and you're delightful to talk to. So I'm just throwing that out there, trying to get you another income stream.
Well, it's a passion for me, and I love talking about it. And if there were any opportunities to do so, I would readily take them up. I love sharing what I've learned and encouraging conversations. So is it something I do? Well, I've just finished the documentary, but already a couple of opportunities along those lines have come up. So I'd be delighted anybody can contact me. The website is birthgap.org. Anyone can contact me through that. I'm Stephen, spelled with a PH, .shaw at birthgap.org. In terms of the documentary itself, it's called Birthgap, Childless World. If I would say one word of caution, this is probably a documentary that you don't want to watch alone, because it fuels so much thought. And there are dark elements to it, as you've seen from this podcast. There are elements to this that might cause deep sorrow. I don't hold back, and much more when you get into parts 2 and 3. But I would encourage people to watch it with someone, a friend, a loved one, a community group. I'd love the idea of neighbors getting together to sit down and watch this together.
What a great way to get a dialogue going about these topics. And it's not to be, negative. It's to start talking about something that's there. And yes. I applaud your courage for not shying away from some of the more difficult areas that this was brought up. And it meant a lot to me that we went in that direction. I didn't know it was going to go there. I didn't know what to expect. And it was fantastic. I just loved talking to you, and keep up the good work. It's really, really courageous. I guess I'll say that word again. It's courageous.
I have 3 kids of my own. And one of the big motivations I had was that my kids and their generation, I think, need to know about the future that they're, moving into. When I realized their future is actually going to be different to the one I prepared them for.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much courage. I just felt a responsibility, to my kids and to the younger generations to find out what is going on and to share that with the world.
Yeah, I think about that too. Like the world that I've prepared my kids for is not going to be the world they're going to be living in. I don't even know exactly what that's going to be, but it's changing so fast. Let's hope humanity makes some good moves.
Ultimately, I do have optimism. We can't change that this phenomenon is happening, and you can't come out of it quickly. It takes decades. But I am optimistic that ultimately it can and will be solved, but only if we start talking about it.
Yes, that's true. That is true. And, like I said to you earlier, that we are a resilient species, but usually we have to have our backs up against the wall before we make a move. And it seems like we're close to it with what we're talking about. You're a little ahead of the curve with information on this. I'm really grateful that you contacted me to do this. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
You've been genuinely very perceptive in this. I think you've understood a lot of the elements that are going on. I think that's probably through the podcast work and the other work you do in the context of your own life. I think for younger people, that's harder because they don't quite have the context that's there. So I do, and I don't mean to minimize people's life experiences at any moment in time. But I do think that there is a role for people who are a little older, like you and me, to share with younger people that actually, the world is changing, and that we, recognize that. I think younger people look up to the experiences of older people. At least some do, and I think we therefore, have in part a responsibility to understand this phenomenon ourselves and interpret it, whichever way we interpret it, and share that. So it's not just me, it's also people like you. And I appreciate greatly this opportunity, to come on the show and talk about it.
And there's certainly plenty of opportunity to come up with solutions. So if you're wondering what you want to do with the future, let's work on the future. That's exactly what we're saying. I see how I tied that together there at the end.
It is. You did.
Thanks so much, Stephen. It's been such a delight to talk to you. Have a fantastic day because it's your morning. So have a great day.
And thank you once again for the opportunity.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. Please check out the website, theexplodinghuman.com, the YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman, and the Exploding Human Facebook page. I want to thank Stephen Shaw once again for being my guest today. Please check out the movie, Birthgap, and have a fantastic day. Thank you so much.